Hello. Okay, today I'm going to give a quick little, somewhat beginner's understanding of one of the concepts of list development versus other languages, and through it understand what eval form, eval selection, and eval all is in the CLOG builder. So, for example, you'll notice here these three buttons, right? That eval form, eval select, and eval all. To understand them, it's worthwhile understanding, well, again, how Lisp sort of works. So, first question is Common Lisp compiled or interpreted? Well, Common Lisp is a language which is, well, either one. There are various different implementations. Some use compiled, some use interpreted, some use both. In SBCL, one of the most common used open source version, everything is compiled. In a ECL, which is what we use for doing Android and iPhone, open source development, that basically is a combination of either interpreted or compiled, or both together. That's the neat thing about Common Lisp, is that pretty much almost anything is possible. Now, happens to be that really doesn't matter very much. With other languages, when you have something which is interpreted, sort of a scripting language, they also sometimes have various different ideas. A Python, for example, will do a sort of a pseudo compile. Java compiles, again, it's sort of a pseudo compile. You basically got some of the language in the middle, an interim language, an interim compile, and again, we'll then recompile it to your local machines. Using a JIT, a real-time compiler at that moment from that in-between language. Again, all that sort of stuff is a little bit different, but in Common Lisp, it's pretty, for the most part, pretty straightforward. Although again, it really depending on how it's implemented, but it really doesn't matter. The real key is actually not about how that works. It's actually a question of how compiling or how using Common Lisp works. That's different. And what happens is like this: Common Lisp works with an image, right? That image, just like when you compile software, let's say you have this huge, gigantic C++ program, and you've spent 10 hours basically waiting for it to compile, and then basically it's all of a sudden all together, and you have one little small change. Well, then there's a problem. You're going to have to recompile the whole thing for every little tiny change that you make. So, of course, there is something called incremental compiling that some compiler tools do allow. So this way you only have to compile part of it. So I guess in some ways, Common Lisp is kind of like that. But I prefer to look at it a little bit different. And that is that basically there are two different basic models for developing software. A file-based model, which most languages work with, and an image-based development. And basically, it's the difference between incremental versus waterfall. File-based is waterfall. Incremental-based is image-based. What happens is when you start up a Common Lisp environment, be it SBCL or any of the other many wonderful environments that exist, every one of those environments basically loads all the runtime that you're normally sticking in say a DLL. A dynamic link library on the side of your application that contains all the runtime for the language. Yes, every language has some kind of runtime. It's just the reality. Everybody sometimes makes it make believe it doesn't exist, but it's there. It's there. There's tons of code that was written by somebody else that basically supports your software, and unless of course you're doing assembly, right? But for the most part, that's the case. So what happens though is that in SBCL, let's say you type in SBCL in the command line or use Slime or one of the other various methods, including CLOG itself, to be able to load up your Lisp environment. Well, that basically loads your your environment, and essentially now you load files, and that fills for the first time, all the software that you want to have running, right? And then what you do is you literally stick into memory, right, every little tiny thing that you want to be doing, or change things that are in memory, right? So, for example, when we're doing our development, you'll see very often that we make small little changes, right? Those small little changes, they have some pretty significant changes in the software. For example, let's run our application till now, right? Let's go ahead, and this is the CLOG Plunger application we've been working on, right? And here's our application. And okay, this window comes up, and okay, my cards, great, right? Now watch this. So now I said, oh, wait a minute, you know, I'd like to make a change. Why is it that it always opens up with such a small window? Why don't I go ahead and I make a change, right? Well, sure, so why don't I go here? Okay, here's create my GUI window. Let's say I go into that, and I go ahead now, and I turn around and I add a width and a height to it. So let's go ahead. Let's do 800, and let's do a height of 600, right? And okay, great. Now, I have to get this basically, to be able to use this piece, I'm going to have to get this into the list of image if we're going to use it, right? So that's where these buttons come into play. So I can eval the selection, right? But the problem is if I do an eval of selection, that basically is going to miss out on, well, all the code around it. So I want to do eval form. That's going to give me the entire form, in this case, from defun all the way to the end. So that actually works, and that's what we'll go ahead and we'll do, right? So now when we go back over here, okay, and remember, we're still program's running. If I go now and I do new free win, look at that, comes up bigger now right from the very start. And again, because we made a change into the actual file. Now take a look at this, by the way. We haven't actually changed the file. Save the file? No. Oh no. Well, that's because, you see, in fact, we go back, we never changed the file itself. We just had a local copy in memory in our editor that we then evaluated. And in fact, if you go back here, this is still running. We haven't changed a thing, right? And in fact, if I go over here, well, let's go ahead and re-put in our code, because that's a pretty neat little feature to start out a little bigger, so we don't have to spend time trying to make it bigger every time. So we'll actually go ahead and add, right, it's 600, that's a good size, eval form, and we go back here, and there it is. That's great. Now, one more thing that's worth doing, okay, is understanding, well, what's the eval all? Well, eval all is very simple. What it does is just takes the entire file that's sitting here, and it evaluates everything that's in that file. So there you go. That's all there. Now, one thing to understand, though, with the eval selection, it's actually possible for us to kind of just add code arbitrarily and run it, right? So, for example, I could go ahead here and I could do print, right, hello, right? And if I went ahead and I did eval select, boom, and actually that runs, and there you go, hello. This is the actual evaluation, what comes back, meaning the actual function return hello. And then this little chupshik here tells me, whoop, this tells me here, the equal sign out, that tells me what what actually was, oh sorry, it was, sorry, the first one is what was the output to the terminal, and the second basically outputs, in other words, to hello. So actually you don't necessarily have to open a REPL to be able to have a REPL, and that's of course that read, evaluate, print loop, right? So you can actually just add code arbitrarily, execute it right on the spot using eval select. So that's a really great feature. All right, let's go ahead and actually save this. And you know what? Let's even go ahead and actually add to our second piece of software. Let's go here. Let's add that over there. Let's add that there. Let's evaluate. Oh, let's do an eval all afterwards, right? And actually, let's free win, right? Because that's what the menu option says. Let's do eval all, right? Let's save our file, and right, if we go here now, new free win, see? Okay, and the new window also starts up nice and big, right? Or bigger, right? Whatever we want. And that's it. That basically tells us how to use all three buttons. Eval form gives you the form. Eval selection, that was a way for us to add a little code and run all kinds of little things. Eval all kind of do it all. It happens to be, since we're already talking about this idea, that actually CLOG has he's got an actual REPL, the same sort of environment that you're used to with Emacs and Slime, although this is really not as powerful, not yet at least. And maybe at some point I'll keep developing it, but the truth is, the major idea behind CLOG is, of course, to be a tool as part of your development environment, which may or may not include Emacs and Slime, or actually I find it quite comfortable just using this environment that we've set up here in CLOG. And I do use a REPL occasionally just to try out little things, you know, you know, I might want to do, I might forget what 1 plus 1 is, right? Then I need to run it in Rebel, so I do it. But otherwise, or I just do eval select. Anyways, all these are options. All these are things that we can use, and Common Lisp is just awesome. Of course, with CLOG, it's also super awesome. All right, enjoy.